Okay, this is pre-algebra lesson 11.1, square roots and irrational numbers. So here we go. We talked about this. You guys know this symbol is the square root symbol, right? If I gave you the number 36, the square root of 36, what that means is that what number times itself equals 36, or what number squared is 36, right? What number times itself is 36? 6, right? And because, now, this is important. 6 times 6 is exactly 36. And that means that the square root of 36 is 6. You ever done square roots before, Brad? Okay. So that's what it means. What if I have this? What if I have the square root of 100? Brad, what is the square root of 100? 10, because 10 times 10 is 100, right? What about the square root of 1? 1, because 1 times 1 is 1. The square root of 1 is 1, right? Okay, let's talk about something here. This is an important concept. So hold on, what's the square root of 16?
4.
4, right, good. I'm going to show you something. This is very important. That is true and it's not true. If you want to get technical, you don't deal with this till next year, but technically, that is not true. The answer is 4, or what number times itself makes 16? 4 times 4, that's 4, right? What's another number that times itself makes 16? What other number times itself makes 16? Think. Is it going to be 3 times 3? No. Is it 8 times 8? No. What other number times itself? Think. What two numbers multiply to 16? What two numbers? 8 and 2. It has to be the same number. So 4 and 4 for sure. What other two numbers?
Negative 4 and negative 4.
Negative 4 and negative 4. Right? Technically, it's 4 or negative 4. Do you agree?
Yes.
The square root of 16 is 4 or negative 4. One thing a lot of people say is they'll say plus or minus 4. That is the actual answer. Plus or minus 4. Does that make sense? Okay. When we're talking about what we're talking about, and that is we're going to be using the Pythagorean theorem tomorrow, the answer has to be a positive number. We're talking about the distance of one of the sides of a triangle. So is there any way the answer could be a negative 4? Can you have a negative distance?
No.
Can I be a negative distance away from Jade? No matter what happens, no matter where I'm standing next to Jade, I'm a positive distance away from her. Does that make sense? When you're talking about a distance, it can't be negative. So just know that next year you will be dealing with, square roots are plus or minus whatever number we're talking about. Okay, what about this? Here's another tricky part. So the square root of 16 is what again? 4 or negative 4. For our purposes, we're just going to say 4. Okay? What is the square root of negative 16? What number times itself makes negative 16? It has to be they have to be the exact same number.
None, right?
What number times itself makes negative 16? Jack says none. Why? Why is that true? They aren't the same, right? So then let's try and prove this. Why is the square root of negative 16? No answer. There's no answer.
Because there are no two numbers that multiply to negative 16.
Why? That's true, but why? Why is there no two numbers that are the same that they multiply to negative 16?
Because a negative times a negative equals a positive.
Because a positive times a positive is a positive, and a negative times a negative is a positive. So then, I don't care what you choose, when you multiply that number by itself, what's going to come out? A positive, right? When you I don't care whether it's a positive times itself or a negative times itself, the answer is going to be a positive. So you know what can never be inside of a square root? A negative number. Because it makes no sense. No number times itself is going to be a negative. So if you ever see a negative inside of a square root, the answer is no solution. There's no answer, right? It's not a real number. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's also talk about this. The square root of 16. That is a rational number. A rational number is a number that can be written as a fraction. The square root of 16, what's the answer? 4. Can 4 be written as a fraction?
Yeah.
How would you write 4 as a fraction? 4 over 1, right? If it can be written as a fraction, then it's a rational number. Rational. R-A-T-I-O-N-A-L. Rational. Does that make sense? Rational. If it's a whole number, it's obviously rational. Can it be a negative number? What about this? Let me show you something else. What is this answer? So there's my 16. I have a negative out front. What's the answer to that?
Negative square.
So this says is the negative. It's negative, the square root of 16. What is the square? What are we square rooting? We're only square rooting.
4.
What are we square rooting?
Oh, 16.
16. So the square root of 16 is
4.
4. So we replace this with 4. And then we have the negative that's out there that belongs in front. The answer is negative 4. Does that make sense? If the negative is out front, that's totally fine. We're just going to deal with the square root of whatever it was, and then you put the negative on later. Does that make sense? Okay. So then, if I have this, the square root of 25, is that a rational number?
Yeah.
Why?
Because it can be written as a fraction.
Why can it be written as a fraction? Because what's the square root of 25?
5.
5. What about this? Is that a rational number?
Yes.
Why?
Because it can be written as a fraction.
Because can negative 5 be written as a fraction?
Yes.
How would you do that? Negative 5 over 1. Pretty simple, right? Okay. What about this? I'm going to show you something else before I move on. What about this? Okay. Here is the square root of 4. What's the square root of 4? 2. Good. Okay. What about the square root of 3? Oh, really? So 1.5 times 1. No, this is important. Someone's going to say that. 1.5 times 1.5. What does 1.5 times 1.5 equal? Is it 3? No. It's like 2 point something.
2.25.
Do you agree that it's not 3? Okay, so then what number times itself is 3? What number times itself is 3? Everybody pull out a calculator.
What's this symbol? Where is it?
It looks like the square root symbol. If you're on your phone, you have to turn your phone sideways.
Oh, it's like 1.732050.
Yeah, it's 1.73205080756887. That's what my calculator says.
7.
Now listen. All right, 2 sevens. Now look, I want you to look at this. If I took this number here and multiplied it by itself. Now look at it. What's the last digit on this that's up that I just wrote up there? What's the last digit?
7.
A 7. What's 7 times 7? 49. Wait a second. In order for this number here to be multiplied by itself, to have it equal 3, isn't that going to have to be a 0? Wouldn't it have to be a 0? Can't have a 9. If I multiply that by itself, isn't it going to be some humongous decimal? Do you understand what I'm saying? It's still going to be a huge decimal. It's not going to equal exactly 3, is it? You know why I stopped at that 7? Because my calculator doesn't go that far. You know how long this thing goes? You know how long that thing goes? Infinite. It never ends. No matter where I stop, with all the numbers, when I take that number, wherever you stop, and you multiply it by itself, it's not going to equal exactly 3. It's going to be very close, but it's not going to equal 3. Does that make sense? Therefore, since this number never ends, and I can never actually have it exactly right, no matter what, every time I stopped here at that 7. This is really close. That number times itself is very close to 3. It'll be like 2.99999999999999999, whatever, right? But that still means that this answer is just an estimate. That is not the exact answer. And no matter how many decimal places I go, it's always going to be an estimate. Therefore, There is no exact number for the square root of 3, so that's an irrational number. Does that make sense? I never can, listen, if I put this number, this 1.7 over 1, does that times itself equal 3? No. It's close, but it's not. Therefore, because I never can stop doing that, boom, that makes it irrational. What makes something irrational? If it can be written as a fraction, that's fine, but let's talk practically. When you look at this, how are you going to know? When you do a square root of whatever, what's the square root of, everybody gets this one wrong, what's the square root of 2? It seems like you're like 1. And you're like, no, because 1 times 1 is, what is 1 times 1 is 2?
4.14213.
Right, 1.4142, and then blah, 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 blah. And whenever you decide to stop, when you take that and you multiply by itself, does it come out to exactly 2? No. Therefore, the square root of 2 is irrational.
Yeah, it comes out to like, when you multiply just those right there, it comes out to like 1.9999616.
Right? Does that make sense? So what about this then? What about this? What if I have this answer? 0.32 with a line over both. What does 0.32 with the line over it mean? It goes 32, 32, 32, 32, 3. It goes on forever, right? Rational, rational or irrational? Is that number rational or irrational?
Irrational.
It's actually rational. Let me show you why. Okay, let me show you why. Let's drop back to this. What about 0.3 with a line over it? What is 0.3? It goes 0.333333333, right? Isn't that, what is 1/3? What is 1/3? Is 1/3 0.3? That's it?
No.
What is 1/3? What is 0.3? Or sorry, what is 1/3? What is 0.3 with a line over it? Right? Okay, so let's go back then. What is 1/3? How do I write 1/3 as a fraction, as a decimal? 0.3 with a line over it. So wait a second. So if 0.3 with a line over it can be written as 1/3, what is true about it? It can be written as a fraction, which makes it rational, right? Okay. 0.32. Do you guys know how to do this? You know what 0.32 is written as a fraction? Haven't we done this, or was that last year? Anything with a repeating decimal over it? What is it? It's not 32 hundredths. It's 32 99ths. Didn't we do this? So 32 99ths. Guess what I just did? I just wrote that thing as a fraction, which makes that a rational number. Does that make sense? If you have a repeating decimal, I don't care what it is, if you have a repeating decimal, that means that you can, in fact, write it as a fraction. And if you can write it as a fraction, then the answer is a rational number. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's talk about something else. Okay. Square root of 100 is 10. Square root of 49? 7. Square root of 36? Okay, so let's talk about this. If I was to say, okay, I want you to rank those from highest to lowest, how would you do that? Highest to lowest, you'd go square root of 100, you'd go square root of 100, square root of 49, and square root of 36. Does that make sense? Okay. What about this? What if I said I want you to rank these, the square root of 50, square root of 70, and the number 8. And I want you to rank those from, we'll say, lowest to highest. Which one's the lowest? Now, first of all, square root of 50. What is the square root of 50? It's going to be like, it's irrational, right? But what do we know it's a little bit bigger than? Because what's the square root of 49? 7. So the square root of 50 is going to be slightly bigger than 7 because square root of 49 is 7. Square root of 50 is going to be like 7.1 or 7.05 or something. Does that make sense? So then if I said I want you to rank these, what about this? What about the square root of 70? What do we know that is bigger than?
50.
No, we know that it's bigger than what number? We know that course it's bigger than 64, but we know that here's the deal. What is the square root of 64? 8. So we know that this square root of 70 is bigger than 8. Does that make sense? So that if I was to have you rank these, it would go square root of 50, 8, and then the square root of 70. Because we know that this right here is a little bit bigger than 7, right? Do you agree? The square root of 50 is a little bit bigger than 7? Square root of just 8 is 8, and the square root of 70, you know, is a little bit bigger than?
Square root of 64.
Which is 8. It's a little bit bigger than 8. Does that make sense? I want you to tell me what two whole numbers this is between. If I gave you the square root of 30, I want to know what two whole numbers that number is in between. No! You shouldn't need to look at anything. No calculator. Between what two numbers is that between? It's between 5 and 6. Why? How is that between 5 and 6? Because the square root of 25 we know is 5, and the square root of 36 is 6. So then the square root of 30 is somewhere in between them. So then the whole numbers that it's between is 5 and 6. Does that make sense? Without using any calculator, you should be able to very quickly determine roughly what's the estimate. Does that make sense? Okay, the square root of 70. Don't say it out loud. Write this down. Between what two whole numbers is the square root of 70? Do not use a calculator. You should be done in 5 seconds. Between what two whole numbers is the square root of 70? You ever written down, Jay? Gigi, what do you have between what two whole numbers? Between 8 and 9. Because the square root of 64 is 8, and the square root of 81 is 9. 70 is in between there. It's between 8 and 9. Does that make sense? Okay, what about this? Negative the square root of 20. Between what, be careful, between what two whole numbers is that between? We'll unpack between what two whole numbers? Right, so negative 4 would be negative the square root of 16, and negative the square root of 25. That's negative 4, that's negative 5. 20 is in between 16 and 25, therefore it's between negative 4 and negative 5. Does that make sense? Are we all getting that? Okay. What about this? What if I did that same thing? I said, okay, let's just do a regular one. Square root of 20. First of all, square root of 20 is? No, it's irrational, right? So there's no whole number. If I said, here's the deal. You know what's awesome about this? And this is true. Once you get into algebra, and I gave you this question, and I said, what is the solution to the negative to the square root of 20? If I say round to the nearest whatever, okay, then you can do that, right? You type in square root of 20, and you round to the nearest 10th or 100, whatever I say. But if I say I want the exact answer, what's the only way to write down the exact answer of the square root of 20? If I said I want the exact answer, you are not allowed to estimate.
You can.
Yes, you can. You know what the answer is? The square root of 20. That's the only way that's exact. The square root of 20 is, okay, that's an answer. It's just, if you do anything else, you're estimating. Do you agree? If I write down anything else, I'm estimating. Anyway, okay, square root of 20. If I asked you to right now tell me, round that thing to the nearest whole number, here's what you do. You're going to, nope, you don't need a calculator. What whole numbers, what's the square root of what whole numbers? The square root of what numbers makes whole numbers that surrounds the square root of 20? So we have the square root of 16, which is 4, right? And the square root of 25, which is 5. Do you agree? Right? All you have to do is look now. Okay, so we know it's between 4 and 5, right? It's going to be 4 point something. Is 20 closer to 16 or is 20 closer to 25?
16.
So then therefore, which whole number, if you rounded it, is it closest to? 4. Does that make sense? Since 20 is closest to 60, that's 4. That's how you do it. You just look at it, okay? What if I gave you this? The square root of 50, square root of 53. I want to know, I've asked to round this to the nearest whole number. Don't use a calculator. You don't need to. What would you do? You go, okay, well, let's see. The nearest whole number, below it would be 7 because the square root of 49. And the nearest whole number above it is 8, which is the square root of 64. Is 53 closer to 49 or is it closer to 64?
49.
Therefore, if you rounded it, it would be closest to 7. Does that make sense? Okay. One last thing. One last thing you got to know. The square root of 9/25. Okay. Here's the deal. Let me show you what to do. Remember, how do you multiply fractions? If I have 1/3 times 2/5, what do I do? You're multiplying here. What do I do? Just straight up multiplying. What do I do?
That's right.
You multiply 1 times 2 is 2, 3 times 5 is 15. Does that make sense? You just multiply straight across. Agreed? So therefore, look, what number times itself makes 9/25? 3/5, right? Because it's 3/5 times 3/5. That makes 9/25. Does that make sense? So when you have a fraction and you're square rooting it, you're literally going to square root the top. That makes the new top, and you're going to square root the bottom. That makes the new bottom. So 9/25 would be 3/5. Yes. Good question. Let's do that. The square root of, this is a good one, the square root of 4/5. Okay. You square root the top, and that becomes the new top, and then you square root the bottom, it becomes the new bottom. You ready? What's the top? What's the square root of 4? 2. Easy. Square root of 5. It's irrational. So you know what you put?
2 over 5. Or square root of 5.
2 times 2 over the square root of 5. Right? Does that make sense? I'm squaring the top, I'm squaring the bottom, I'm done. This is an algebra thing. That's algebra. That's next year. We're not doing that this year. That's how you do it, though. So what is this? What is the square root of 9/100? What's the square root of 9/100?
3 over 10.
It's 3/10. Right? Square the top over the square of the bottom. Boom. Makes sense? Okay. What about this? Negative 9/10. What is that? Wrong. Any number times itself cannot be a negative. If there's a negative inside of the square root symbol, the answer is
No solution.
there's no answer. It's not a real number. Got it? Okay. Let me give you one. For right now, you can just put no solution or no. It would be not a real number. But I don't even think they give you those. I'm showing you that so you can know. Okay. Next week is Easter, yes? Thank God. Page 582, 1 through 33 even. Let me make sure that that's what I want. 1 through 33 even. Yeah, easy. Okay.